Good afternoon. I am Kim Wani, Chief Director of GAFSC. Before delivering keynote speech, I'd like to thank all the presenters, discussants, and audience joining us online and offline. Globally, public pension, including public officials' pension, the scale and nature of its liability draws significant attention from the general public, and Korea is not an exception. So it is important to refer to other countries' cases and seek ideal direction we need to pursue going forward. In this keynote speech that precedes case studies of different countries, I'd like to share pension accounting status among OECD countries and diversity of their accounting based on the research performed by GAFSC. First, I'd like to touch upon provision for pensions and four major pensions of Korea, which are for public officials, military employees, general public, and private school teachers. As you know, provision for pensions refers to the present obligation of the government to pay pensions in the future for a long period of time to its employees, such as public officials, for their work provided. And according to accrual accounting, cost and liability is recognized upon work supply, which is the cost of pension payment, and future pension benefit amount is estimated based on financial assumptions such as inflation and salary increase rate, and demographic assumptions such as death and retirement rate. And as mentioned before, Korea's public pension system can be broken down to four schemes for public officials, military employees, general public, and private school teachers. As public officials and military employees are employees of the government, provision for pension is recognized. The general public and private school teachers, however, are not the employees of the government, so the relevant schemes do not recognize provision. Based on the settlement data of financial year of 2019, number of public official employees is 1,727,000 and number of military enrollees is 287,000. Liability amount for public officials' pension is 758.4 trillion Korean won, while that for military employee pension is recognized at 185 trillion Korean won. National pension enrollees stand at 27 million. Private school teacher enrollees at 397,000. Reserves of the national pension amount to 736 trillion Korean won, and for private school teachers' pension total at 2.2 trillion. For your information, the number of enrollees combine the workers who are paying insurance premium and pensioners who are receiving benefits. Looking into provision for pensions, that for public officials and military employees' pensions is if you look at the annual trend, it is on the rise year after year from 643 trillion Korean won in 2014 to 944 trillion Korean won in 2019. And annual increase rates vary greatly depending on decline of base interest rate and assumption changes in the relevant financial year. For example, in 2015, which was affected by public officials' pension reform, and in 2019, when salary increase assumption was realized, the annual increase rate was moderate. Many countries faced with COVID-19 pandemic are implementing policies to expand the fiscal spending, and Korea is not an exception. Accordingly, our fiscal deficit rises in 2020 and the issue of fiscal health came to the fore. When discussing about fiscal health, however, provision for pension is really important, and accrual-based liabilities are important, but they do not receive the attention they deserve. So, we would like to look into how accounting treatments take place for public officials' pension in OECD countries. As of November 2020, 37 countries are OECD members, and according to OECD survey, among those 37 OECD members, 28 produce accrual-based accounting information. Among the 28 countries that adopted accrual accounting, those that recognize provision for pension and disclose, as Korea does, amount to 13, including the US, UK, Switzerland, and Canada. And those 13 countries apply a similar criteria to employee benefits of IPSAS or IFRS when recognizing provision for pensions. And provision for pensions as ratio of total liability is the highest in Korea, followed by Iceland and the UK. And as ratio of GDP, it is the highest in the UK, followed by Israel, Korea, and the US. On the other hand, the ratio is relatively low in New Zealand and Switzerland. The 13 countries that recognize provision for pension fall short of 50% of 28 countries adopting accrual-based accounting. And even among the countries that recognize liability, ratios differ. As such, it can be assumed that accounting of public official pensions varies from country to country. To verify this assumption, an in-depth analysis was performed. The countries that do not recognize provision for pensions, the number of those countries was 15, including France, Japan, and Spain. Those countries have adopted accrual accounting but do not recognize liabilities of employee benefits set out by IFRS and IPSAS. So if there are those countries, I think that is attributable to their circumstances and grounds. 13 countries that consider public officials' pension as employee benefits recognize liability on financial statements. On the other hand, 15 countries that consider public officials' pension as social security benefits do not recognize liability on financial statements. In terms of pension information disclosure among the 15 countries that do not recognize pension liability, France, Austria, and Finland disclose the information in the notes, while Japan recognizes pension fund reserves as liability. This is the summary of 13 countries recognizing liability and 15 countries that do not. Even among the countries that recognize public officials' pension as liabilities, their accounting methods vary. For example, retirement pension and other welfare policies such as employee insurance are included in liability in the US, while government financial statements cover local governments, so the liability as percentage of GDP is high in the UK. And in the case of Switzerland, after a certain period of time from the introduction of accrual accounting, depending on the maturity of the accounting system, Switzerland began to recognize liability. And among the 15 countries that do not recognize public official pension as liability, their grounds and disclosure methods differ. Non-recognition in finance statements, but provision amount is calculated and disclosed in the notes in France. On the other hand, fiscal balance estimates not based on accrual are disclosed in some countries. And there are also the countries where public official pension has changed from DB to DC, so liability is not calculated. And in the case of Japan, public official pension is considered as social security, so not recognized as liability, but pension reserve is recognized as liability. Among 28 countries in this web seminar, we are going to focus on 4 countries. First, Korea, that began to recognize liability upon the introduction of accrual accounting in 2011, and we are going to focus also on Switzerland that began to recognize liability in 2017 after disclosures in notes. And among the countries that do not recognize public official pension as liability, we are going to focus on France, that discloses calculated amount only in the note, and Japan, where public official pension is not considered as liability as per employee benefit criteria, while reserve is recognized as liability. The countries that are going to share their experience in this symposium show these accounting methods, grounds, and liability scale. So you are going to listen to the presentations of different countries, so you will be able to get great takeaways from these presentations. Korea is similar to Switzerland in terms of the context and grounds of liability recognition, and also similar to France in that nature of Social Security coexists. So please bear that in mind when you listen to presentations. Diverse accounting treatments is attributable to nature of pension scheme, history and scheme establishment and developments, and different views towards pension payment obligation. Considering the diversity in accounting treatments, we need to discuss what is the useful pension accounting information to the users, including the government and general public, and potential improvements and measures to calculate and utilize useful pension accounting information need to be discussed. Thank you so much for listening. That was my keynote speech.